and Border Patrol.
So Peter Ducey joins us live from the White House as the bill heads for a vote in the House. Peter, at 2 a.m., where were you?
So, okay, listen to this. At 11:47 at night on March 18th, something happened that nobody knew about until now. Donald Trump, the President of America, made a secret phone call to Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada. They talked for 23 whole minutes. And what was said during those 23 minutes, what Trump offered, what he asked for, and what Carney flat out said no to, has now been leaked by people on both sides of the border.
I was asleep. Just where were you at 2 a.m. on a work day?
I was probably hitting snooze at 2 a.m. but that's what they did. They worked until 2 a.m. and passed something.
Appreciate the honesty all around.
And that no didn't just end a phone call, it slammed the door shut on the last possible way to fix the trade fight between the US and Canada, and it started a chain reaction that is still shaking up money markets, government meetings, and planning rooms on every single continent. This is not just political drama, this is like watching a building crack from the inside. You are watching the moment when the most powerful country on earth secretly admitted that it had lost its power over a neighbor that is 1/10 its size, tried to get that power back through a backroom deal, and got told no in a way that left zero room to try again. And the whole world is paying attention. Every friend, every enemy, every country that has ever been pushed around by American money pressure is studying exactly what happened in those 23 minutes, because the rules of the game just changed. Warren Buffett's response, which came out 14 hours after the call went public, was just 3 sentences, but those sentences will be in international relations textbooks for decades. When you call someone privately to offer what you publicly refuse to negotiate, you've admitted the public position was a bluff. When they say no anyway, you've lost both the negotiation and the bluff. That is not diplomacy. That is desperation becoming visible. Subscribe now because this story is still going and the consequences are going to reshape the global economic order for years. Let me show you exactly what happened, why it happened, and why the no matters even more than the phone call itself. Before you can understand why Trump made this call, why he made it when he did, and why getting rejected was so devastating, you need to understand where Trump was standing when he made that call. Because by March 18th, 8 months into the trade war, every single weapon America had used against Canada had either flopped, blown up in their face, or been carefully dismantled by a former banker who understood America's game better than America did. The tariffs, 25 to 50% taxes on Canadian goods, worth $35 to $40 billion a year, were supposed to make Canadian businesses panic and pressure Carney into giving in. Instead, Canada hit back surgically, targeting things that hurt specific American states: Kentucky bourbon, Iowa soybeans, Wisconsin dairy, Florida consumer products. The pain didn't go north to Ottawa. It went south to Washington from Republican senators whose voters were losing export markets and watching prices crash at home. The energy threats, the national security review of 4 million barrels per day of Canadian oil worth $120 billion a year were supposed to give Washington total power over Canadian oil money. Instead, Canada built new ways to sell its energy elsewhere. Atlantic LNG terminals selling to European markets, Pacific Coast facilities selling to Japan and South Korea, a Germany-Canada energy deal locking in long-term contracts at full market rates. Within months, Canada went from being totally dependent on American refineries to being just mildly inconvenienced by them. The critical minerals ultimatum, demanding cheap access to Canadian lithium, nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements, was supposed to lock up American supply chains for modern manufacturing. Instead, Canada signed a 25-year deal with Germany at full market price with $12 billion in German investment thrown in, building mineral processing factories right on Canadian soil. American manufacturers who thought they would get cheap guaranteed access now have to compete on the open market against German, Japanese, and Korean rivals who secured their supply while Washington was still making demands. Ottawa had zero intention of accepting those 5 demands. The sovereignty clause forcing Canada to check with Washington before signing trade deals. The currency ban limiting what the Bank of Canada could do with its money. the snapback tariff power, the foreign policy alignment, the intelligence conditions. These were supposed to turn the relationship into a situation where Canada was basically underneath America. Instead, Canada said no publicly, unanimously, and permanently in a parliament speech that got a standing ovation from every single party and over 80% approval from regular Canadian people. The diplomatic isolation campaign, trying to get allies to turn against Canada in international meetings, was supposed to make Ottawa feel alone and scared. Instead, every ally picked Ottawa. Germany signed a $180 billion partnership. The Commonwealth came together into an economic fortress across 56 nations. The EU got stronger ties with Canada. Pacific trade partners got closer to Canada. The isolation campaign isolated Washington instead, and the deal destructions, the $730 billion framework blown up with poison pills at the last second, the $917 billion agreement killed because it didn't have a sovereignty clause that Canada had already publicly rejected, were supposed to prove that Canada needed America more than America needed Canada. Instead, they proved that American negotiators could spend weeks building deals that political operatives would destroy in hours for reasons that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with wanting to be the boss. By March 18th, 8 months into the trade war, every tool in America's toolbox had been used. Every single tool had either failed or made things worse. The leverage was gone. The strategy made no sense anymore. And the alternatives Canada built during those 8 months, the EU expansion, the Pacific Partnership, the Commonwealth Fortress, the Atlantic Energy Infrastructure, were permanent, legally binding, fully working, and backed by long-term contracts with the world's biggest economies. That is where Trump was calling from at 11:47 at night on March 18th. Not from strength, from desperation. Here is what we know about the call. And the sources matter because this is not guesswork or rumor. This is confirmed through multiple independent sources on both sides of the border with details that only people who were actually there could know. The Washington Post reported the call existed on March 20th, citing 3 senior administration officials who spoke without giving their names. The Globe and Mail confirmed it separately through 2 sources inside the Prime Minister's office. Bloomberg got a partial readout from a U.S. trade official who was briefed right after the call, and the Financial Times published the most detailed account sourced to someone on the Canadian side who gave specific words used in the conversation. The call was started by Trump personally, not through normal government channels. No heads up was given to the Canadian embassy in Washington. No warning through the National Security Council system. Trump called Carney's direct line, the number used for emergency calls between heads of government, at 11:47 at night Eastern Time, which was 12:47 in the morning in Ottawa. Carney was woken up by the call. He took it from home. No advisors were with him on the Canadian side during the first 11 minutes. Trump had at least 2 people with him, confirmed by background voices picked up on the recording that Canadian security rules automatically make for all calls to the Prime Minister's secure line. The call lasted 23 minutes. The mood, according to the Canadian source, started friendly and got more and more frustrated as it went on. Trump did most of the talking in the first half. Carney did most of the talking in the second half. And by minute 19, according to the Washington Post source, Trump's voice had shifted from negotiating to basically begging. Here is what Trump offered. And the details matter because this was not some vague olive branch. This was a concrete offer that represented the biggest flip in American position in the entire 8-month fight. Trump offered to pull back all tariffs on Canadian goods immediately. The 25 to 50% taxes on steel, aluminum, lumber, dairy, manufactured products, all of it gone within 72 hours of an agreement. He offered to drop the national security review of Canadian energy imports, guaranteeing smooth market access for Canadian oil, natural gas, and electricity through existing pipelines and power lines. He offered to abandon the critical minerals demands, accepting Canadian resource sales at regular market rates with no cheap access requirements. He offered to throw out all 5 demands completely from any future negotiation. No sovereignty clause, no currency ban, no snapback tariff power, no foreign policy alignment, no intelligence conditions. He described the 5 demands as a negotiating position that had done its job and could now be put away in the interest of a bigger partnership. And he offered to bring back the $917 billion trade framework that he himself had killed just 6 weeks earlier, with changes that would address Canadian concerns about sovereignty and fairness. He called it a return to the table with a clean slate, starting fresh with mutual respect and recognition that both sides had real interests worth honoring. In exchange, Trump asked for one thing: that Canada pause, not cancel, just pause its implementation of the EU expansion and the Pacific Partnership for 180 days while a new bilateral deal was negotiated. 6 months. That is all he asked for. 6 months to rebuild the U.S.-Canada trade relationship before the alternatives became fully locked in. He framed it as a cooling-off period that would give both sides room to breathe, let domestic politics on both sides calm down, and create space for professional negotiators to build something lasting without the pressure of daily headlines and escalating back and forth. He called it a gesture of good faith that would show Canada was interested in partnership rather than divorce, and he made it personal. According to the Financial Times source, Trump told Carney directly, "You've proven your point. You've shown the world Canada can build alternatives. You've demonstrated independence. Nobody's questioning that anymore. But we're neighbors. We share a border, a defense setup, intelligence systems, family connections going back generations. 6 months. That is all I am asking. 6 months to fix this before it becomes permanent." The offer was real. The request was specific. And the desperation was audible. Carney's response, according to multiple sources who were briefed right after the call, was polite, clear, and completely final. He thanked Trump for the call and for the offer. He acknowledged that the terms represented a big shift from previous American positions. And then he said no. The EU expansion and the Pacific Partnership are not paused. They're not under review. They're operational. The agreements are signed, binding international law. The infrastructure is under construction. The supply contracts are being executed. The investment commitments are being fulfilled. The institutional frameworks are being built by thousands of civil servants, regulators, and trade officials across 34 countries on multiple continents. Carney explained that the agreements were not built as weapons against the United States. They were built as insurance against being too dependent on any single trading partner. And insurance does not work if you cancel it the moment the danger seems to fade away. The whole point of spreading your options is that it is permanent, structurally embedded in legal commitments and physical infrastructure that outlasts political cycles and diplomatic ups and downs. He pointed out that Canada had spent 8 months soaking up tariffs, energy threats, mineral demands, sovereignty ultimatums, diplomatic isolation, and deal sabotage while building these alternatives. Asking Canada to pause implementation after going through all of that would tell every country that signed the EU and Pacific agreements that Canada's commitments can be undone, negotiated away, reversed whenever Washington asks nicely. And that message would destroy Canada's reputation as a trustworthy trading partner with every nation that just signed long-term deals worth $140 to $160 billion in annual trade. Germany did not invest $12 billion in Canadian mineral processing to watch it get put on hold because of a phone call. Japan and South Korea did not lock in energy supply deals to see them suspended for a cooling-off period with the country that threatened them in the first place. Carney's answer was not angry. It was not emotional. It was logical. The position you are calling from is the position you created. The alternatives you are asking me to pause are the alternatives your own strategy pushed me to build. And the trust I built with 34 nations over 8 months is worth more than 6 months of breathing room with a partner whose word has proven unreliable. According to the Washington Post source, Trump tried a different angle. He pointed to the economic pain Canada had absorbed, the short-term hurt of retaliatory tariffs, the political pressure from affected industries, the uncertainty that had been dragging on Canadian business confidence for 8 months. He suggested that a bilateral deal with the United States would ease that pain faster and more completely than waiting for the EU and Pacific frameworks to fully grow. Carney's response, according to the Canadian source, was the most devastating moment of the whole call. The costs you are describing are already paid. We have already gone through that pain. The alternatives we built are not future insurance anymore. They are present reality right now. Pausing them does not relieve pressure. It creates new pressure by signaling to partners who trusted us that we are not reliable. Partners who signed binding agreements with us while we were being actively attacked by you economically. The call ended at 12:10 in the morning Ottawa time. Carney thanked Trump again for reaching out and repeated that Canada remained open to talking about things that matter to both sides: border security, continental defense, environmental work together, but that the trade diversification strategy was not a negotiating position. It was a structural reality, and structural realities do not pause. Trump, according to the Bloomberg source, ended the call with one sentence: "You are making a mistake you will regret." And the line went dead. Within 14 hours, the call had leaked, not through official channels, but through carefully placed tips to reporters who had covered the trade war from the beginning and had the credibility to publish sensitive stuff confidently. The Canadian side leaked first, according to media analysts tracking the timeline. The Globe and Mail published at 2:14 in the afternoon Ottawa time on March 20th. The Washington Post followed at 9:47 in the morning Eastern Time, 5 hours later, with the American perspective. The leak strategy, according to diplomatic analysts, was deliberate and smart. Canada wanted the world to know that America had blinked, that the public position of strength was secretly revealed as weakness, that the president who spent 8 months threatening, demanding, and sabotaging had called in the middle of the night to offer everything he had publicly refused and to beg for a pause that would never come. The leak was not designed to embarrass. It was designed to teach a lesson, to show every nation watching that American economic pressure has a breaking point, and that the breaking point becomes visible when the pressure fails and the desperation becomes audible in a private phone call that gets leaked 14 hours later. And then Warren Buffett delivered the verdict that turned the phone call from a diplomatic embarrassment into a full judgment on American strategic smarts. When you call someone privately to offer what you publicly refuse to negotiate, you have admitted the public position was a bluff. When they say no anyway, you have lost both the negotiation and the bluff. That is not diplomacy. That is desperation becoming visible. Buffett added more in a follow-up statement released through Berkshire Hathaway's Investor Relations Office. A statement that financial media published in full and that analysts are calling the most important private sector commentary on American trade policy in modern history. The call itself is not the story. The call is a symptom. The story is what the call reveals about the strategic position America has negotiated itself into. 8 months ago, the United States had real power over Canada because Canada needed American markets. Today, that dependency has been systematically taken apart through binding agreements with 34 nations across 6 continents. The leverage is gone, not weakened. Gone. And when leverage is gone, you have 2 choices: accept the new reality and negotiate as equals, or pretend the old reality still exists and make increasingly desperate attempts to recover leverage that no longer exists. The phone call was option 2. The rejection was reality teaching a lesson that no amount of tariffs, threats, or midnight phone calls can undo. Buffett kept going with the economic explanation that makes clear why the rejection matters more than the call. Markets can price risk. They can price uncertainty. They can price political instability. What they cannot price is a fundamental shift in the structure of economic relationships that were assumed to be permanent. For 75 years, the US-Canada trade relationship was the most stable bilateral economic partnership in the world. That stability was something valuable that every business, every investor, every supply chain manager could build their strategies around. That asset is now gone. Not because Canada was aggressive, because of American strategy. And the phone call, the offer, the rejection, the leak, all of it confirms that the shift is structural, permanent, and impossible to reverse through any tool available to American policymakers. You cannot phone call your way back to a dependency that has been contractually replaced by alternatives. The investment impact is immediate and measurable. Berkshire has been expanding Canadian holdings for months: energy, infrastructure, transportation, resources, financial services. But Buffett revealed something new. A dedicated team inside Berkshire set up 3 months ago focused specifically on finding Commonwealth-aligned investment opportunities, companies positioned to benefit from the EU-Canada expansion, the Pacific Partnership, the multilateral settlement systems that bypass dollar-denominated go-betweens. When the greatest investor in history builds a team specifically to cash in on the decline of American economic centrality, the decline is real. And the phone call that just leaked confirmed what the money already knew. The center is shifting, and it is not shifting back. The global reaction to the leak was immediate, massive, and revealed a pattern that should terrify every strategist in Washington, because the reaction was not sympathy for America's weakened position. It was vindication for everyone who had ever been pressured, threatened, or pushed around by American economic power and told they had no alternatives. The European Union's Trade Commissioner put out a statement within 6 hours of the leak going public. Canada's decision to maintain its commitments to European partners despite significant pressure shows the kind of reliability that forms the foundation of lasting trade relationships. The EU's partnership with Canada is not transactional. It is structural, and it will keep getting deeper. The words were diplomatic. The message was clear. Europe watched America pressure Canada to walk away from agreements with Europe. Canada said no. Europe now trusts Canada more than it trusts America. And that trust is being turned into deeper integration, more investment, and stronger institutional ties. Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry released a similar statement, noting that Canada's commitment to its Pacific partnerships under difficult circumstances shows the seriousness with which Ottawa takes its international obligations. The statement specifically mentioned new energy supply agreements being finalized with Canadian producers, agreements that lock in long-term access to resources that American companies had assumed would always be there for them based on proximity and history. India's Ministry of External Affairs went even further. The Commonwealth Economic Sovereignty Agreement represents a new model for trade relationships built on mutual respect rather than coercive leverage. Canada's leadership in maintaining its commitments demonstrates why the Commonwealth framework is attracting interest from nations seeking alternatives to dependence on single dominant partners. Every statement, every reaction, every carefully worded press release from governments across Europe, Asia, and Africa carried the same unspoken message. America tried to force a reversal. Canada refused. And we respect the refusal more than we ever respected the compliance that came before it. Financial markets processed the leak with speed and clarity that showed how much strategic repositioning had already been happening quietly beneath the surface of public announcements. The Canadian dollar strengthened 1.3% against the US dollar within hours of the leak, the biggest single-day move in 8 months. Canadian government bond yields tightened as investors priced in reduced political risk and more confidence in Ottawa's strategic direction. American companies with big Canadian exposure saw mixed reactions. Those positioned to benefit from stable bilateral relations dropped. Those with more diversified North American operations that could adapt to the new reality held steady. But companies dependent on the old integrated supply chain model, auto manufacturers, energy refiners, cross-border logistics firms, dropped sharply as investors recognized that the phone call's failure meant the old model was permanently gone. Commonwealth-aligned stocks rallied. London-listed multinationals with big Canadian operations gained, Indian conglomerates with resource partnerships surged, Australian mining companies with critical mineral supply agreements hit multi-month highs. The market was not reacting to the phone call. It was reacting to the confirmation that the alternatives to American economic centrality were real, working, and politically durable enough to survive a direct personal appeal from the American president.